The world of Catachan lies deep within the Segmentum Ultima, a planet engulfed in toxic, overgrown jungle, and among the most lethal environments in the Imperium. From its earliest records, Catachan has been classified as a death world, one of the few in which the very act of surviving childhood becomes a form of elite training. The planet's natural history remains largely undocumented due to the sheer danger posed to cartographers and imperial historians, but those few records that do exist describe Catachan as once habitable, its surface changed over millennia by unexplained biological mutations and rampant jungle overgrowth. Whether caused by ancient Xenos experimentation, a pre-imperial catastrophe, or unknown chaos influences remains unclear. Some agree, however, that its aggressive biosphere is not naturally evolved. The planet's surface is dominated by jungle that never ends. The flora includes carnivorous trees, flesh-melting vines, and pollen clouds that liquefy lungs in minutes. Fauna are even more deadly. The Catachan devil, one of the largest known predatory insects in the Imperium, can grow larger than a chimera transport. Even the smaller predators, swamp stalkers, spike beasts, and brainleaf parasites, pose fatal threats to full-grown soldiers. The average survival rate of off-worlders left untrained on Catachan is less than 1 in 10. For its native population, these conditions are a crucible from birth. There is no formal schooling, no gentle childhood. Every Catachan child who reaches adolescence has already fought for their life more times than most Imperial Guardsmen see in a career. The earliest official Imperial records describing Catachan date to approximately millennia 36, year 88, although local legends suggest human colonization may have occurred far earlier. Some evidence suggests settlers arrived during the Dark Age of technology and were subsequently cut off during the Age of Strife. Genetic markers among Catachans indicate shared ancestry with baseline humans, but extensive environmental adaptation has led to distinct biological developments. While officially still classified as human, Catachans differ in muscle density, immune resistance, and pain tolerance. Many exhibit enhanced reflexes, unusually dense bone structure, and increased cardiovascular durability, likely due to constant exposure to neurotoxins, viral threats, and predation. Catachans are generally tall, with most adult males ranging between 6 feet and 6 feet 6 inches. Their musculature is dense and heavily defined, a result of lifelong physical survival rather than formal training. Skin is often weathered and tanned from constant exposure to ultraviolet radiation and toxic spores, sometimes marked by scars or the acidic burns of native predators. Their eyes range from green to brown, often deeply set, with visual acuity adapted to low-light conditions. Hair is commonly black or dark brown, worn short or tied back for practicality. Many adopt war paint, not as ornamentation, but as scent and heat diffusers to confuse local fauna. The military culture of Catachan is not a matter of doctrine but of instinct. Every native is, by necessity, a survivalist and fighter before they ever wear a uniform. When pressed into Imperial Guard service, they are formed into regiments known as the Catachan Jungle Fighters. These units are not structured in the same way as standard Astra Militarum formations. They operate with extreme autonomy, often rejecting mechanized support and preferring sabotage, infiltration, and guerrilla tactics. Traditional combined arms doctrine does not apply. Catachans fight dirty, exploit terrain, and leave nothing behind but tripwire minds and bodies. They are experts in ambush warfare, operating in terrain others deem impassable. Recruitment does not follow the scholar progenium or tithe-based system common across the Imperium. Instead, the Catachan PDF maintains a tradition of voluntary enlistment, followed by internal selection through dueling, challenge trials, and tests of survival. Command is earned, not assigned. Rank means nothing without respect, and officers unable to hold their own in the jungle quickly lose authority or lives. While commissars are technically attached to Catachan regiments, many choose instead to observe from a distance. Few survive attempts to enforce standard discipline. In practice, Catachan squads operate more like autonomous kill teams than regulated battalions. Socially, the Catachans form tight, insular communities. Villages are small, fortified compounds often built around defensible terrain features such as cliffs, rivers, or ancient bunker ruins. Elders serve as informal leaders, usually veterans of many off-world deployments. There is no formal caste system, but status is directly tied to one's ability to survive, protect, and kill. Children are raised communally, taught tracking, hunting, and field surgery by age 7. Religious observance is minimal and practical, with reverence directed more often toward fallen comrades than abstract deities. While they recognize the Emperor as the protector of mankind, most Catachans view faith as something proven through action. Catachan technology is largely Imperial standard but heavily modified. Standard-issue las guns are stripped down, shortened, or rebuilt with jury-rigged power packs. Catachans often abandon flak armor in favor of lighter gear that allows greater movement through dense jungle terrain. Explosives and trap-making tools are prioritized over heavy weapons. Each soldier carries personal blades, machetes, gutting knives, or ancestral short swords, alongside standard-issue firearms. Uniforms are minimal and adapted for heat dispersion and camouflage. There is no ceremony in their war gear, no ornamentation. Every item has a purpose, and sentimentality is expressed through scars, not medals. One of the most recognizable symbols of the Catachan regiments is the Catachan Fang, a curved combat knife forged from rare alloys found only on the planet. Each blade is a mark of honor, often forged by the user or passed down from a fallen relative. The Catachan Devils, an elite subunit of the regiment, wear specialized anti-toxic gear and deploy behind enemy lines for sabotage, assassination, and deep infiltration. They are whispered about even among veteran guardsmen as ghosts of the jungle, silent, ruthless, and invisible. Key figures from Catachan regiments are rare but legendary. Colonel Iron Hand Straken, for instance, is one of the most decorated jungle fighters in Imperial history. After losing his left arm to a Miral land shark, he had it replaced with a bionic limb and continued fighting through dozens of campaigns. His command style reflects Catachan values: aggressive, instinct-driven, and intolerant of weakness. Straken is not alone. Sly Marbo, a mythologized figure within the Guard, is either a living legend or a PSYOP's ghost story, depending on which trooper is telling it. Described as a one-man army capable of eliminating entire enemy outposts alone, his existence is officially documented but rarely confirmed in the field. Philosophically, Catachans approach warfare as a necessary function of life, not as glory or duty. They do not celebrate victory with pomp or ritual. Survival is its own form of victory. Combat rituals are practical: shared meals before battle, sharpening of blades, quiet moments remembering the dead. They carry their culture through motion, not through writing or doctrine. Stories are told in scars, not in scripture. While other regiments chant hymns or light incense, the Catachan pre-battle ritual often involves silence, knife checks, and synchronized breathing. The internal structure of their regiments resists hierarchy. While official ranks exist, real power flows through reputation and competence. A sergeant respected by their squad carries more weight than a lieutenant from off-world. Outsiders placed into leadership roles often find themselves quietly ignored until they prove their worth. Logistics are a challenge. Catachan regiments rarely receive regular resupply. Instead, they rely on captured gear, natural resources, and field engineering. They make their own medicine from local herbs and synthesize toxins for use in guerrilla traps. They carry what they need and leave the rest behind. Behaviourally, Catachans exhibit extreme distrust of strangers, particularly bureaucrats, psychers, and high-born officers. Their instincts are honed towards skepticism, autonomy, and self-reliance. When placed on garrison duty or urban campaigns, they often clash with local authorities due to their blunt, informal conduct and refusal to follow ceremonial protocol. However, when placed in environments similar to their homeworld — jungle, swamp, overgrowth — They operate with unmatched lethality. Entire Tyranid vanguard broods, chaos cult nests, and Orc advance forces have been wiped out without formal engagements, simply by the Catachans letting the jungle swallow them. Though they represent a small fraction of the total Astra Militarum, the impact of the Catachan Jungle Fighters on key campaigns far outweighs their numbers. Their reputation precedes them, often amplified by horror stories whispered in trenches and outposts. They are not the hammer of the Emperor, they are the scalpel buried in the enemy's neck. They are not noble nor ceremonial, they are the jungle incarnate fighting not for medals, not for ideology, but because survival is the only constant they have ever known. The leadership ethos of Catachan regiments reflects the brutality of their homeworld. While the wider Astra Militarum relies on rigid command structures, hierarchies, and administratively assigned ranks, Catachan units operate according to respect-based authority. Command is not granted by promotion, but earned through proven resilience, combat instincts, and direct survival in the harshest conditions. Many Catachan squads operate under individuals who hold no formal rank, but whose authority is accepted unquestioningly due to their reputation. An outsider might mistake this for disorder, but within Catachan culture, this decentralized command system functions with remarkable cohesion. Officers from other worlds frequently misinterpret Catachan behavior as insubordinate or undisciplined. In reality, their approach to hierarchy is deeply pragmatic. If a superior fails to demonstrate competency, particularly in a combat zone, their orders are ignored or quietly reinterpreted by squad veterans. On occasion, such incompetence leads to fatal outcomes, often framed as accidents in after-action reports. Commissars assigned to Catachan regiments are typically chosen from among the few who have survived similar environments or are tactically astute enough to adapt their leadership approach. The more rigid or ceremonial commissars often suffer mysterious ends, some documented as jungle-related fatalities, others simply disappearing during a mission. Despite this rejection of formalism, the Catachan regiments are not lawless. Their cohesion stems from mutual respect, shared trauma, and an internal code shaped by the survivalist demands of their homeworld. Loyalty among squadmates is absolute. Betrayal is considered unforgivable, and cowardice is treated as a moral failure. Catachans seldom speak of their internal rules, but their actions reveal an unspoken system of justice enforced within the ranks. Disputes are settled through personal challenge, survival trials, or, in extreme cases, silent ostracism. Offenders vanish into the jungle and are not spoken of again. Logistics within Catachan deployments operate under radically different assumptions compared to standard guard regiments. Traditional supply chains reliant on fuel convoys, drop shipments, and mechanized support are often unnecessary or unfeasible in the environments where Catachan regiments are deployed. Instead, these soldiers are trained to forage, scavenge, and repurpose materials from the field. Improvised explosives are crafted from enemy ordnance, jungle toxins, or repurposed fuel cells. Medical supplies include not only standard-issue stim injectors, but also salves brewed from toxic flora, whose counter properties have been learned through generations of trial and lethal error. This scavenger philosophy extends to their engineering practices. While Catachan regiments lack the dedicated tech priest support typical of the Mechanicus-aligned forces, they compensate through field jury rigging. Standard-issue Chimera transports are often stripped of unnecessary armour to allow passage through tight underbrush. Heavy bolters might be remounted into tripod configurations for ambush traps. Minefields are replaced with spiked trenches lined with jungle thorns dipped in paralytic enzymes. Few regiments exhibit such an instinctual integration of environment into combat design. The terrain itself becomes a weapon in the hands of Catachan soldiers. Where other units might dread jungle warfare, Catachans thrive. They mould the battlefield to suit them. Vegetation is used for concealment, predator migration paths are redirected into enemy supply lines, and entire units vanish into marshes to avoid orbital scans. It is not uncommon for enemy commanders to report the complete disappearance of a Catachan platoon, only to suffer sabotage, assassinations, and morale degradation days later without ever seeing the assailants. The distinction between military and civilian life is nearly non-existent on Catachan. Every native is a potential soldier. Even those who never leave the planet participate in its constant informal war for survival. This blurs the lines between peace and warfare, fostering a culture where violence is not glorified, but accepted as an inevitable necessity. Catachan civilians, particularly elders and hunters, are sometimes as lethal as frontline soldiers. There are recorded instances where returning veterans learned new techniques from relatives who never left their home village. Technology, while basic compared to the Mechanicus standard, is treated with respect for function over form. Catachans are not anti-technology in philosophy, but they are dismissive of anything that complicates survival. Machine spirits are acknowledged, but seldom worshipped. Rites of maintenance are shortened or ignored entirely. Devices that require prayers or rituals are often abandoned or re-engineered for simplicity. A voxcaster is more likely to be hand-wired into a makeshift antenna using scrap metal than properly blessed by a tech priest. Despite this pragmatism, there are exceptions. The Catachan Devils, among the most elite infiltration operatives in the Imperium, employ specialized tech including cloaking mesh, scent dampeners, and auto-targeting optics tuned to bioheat signatures. While these tools are rarely manufactured on Catachan, their maintenance and modification have become a form of oral tradition among the Devils. Only the most experienced fighters are initiated into their use, and their deployment is often withheld even from Imperial command until mission critical. The origin of Catachan's unique survival instinct is debated among Imperial scholars. Some Mechanica xenobiologists propose that minor genetic drift, accelerated by high environmental pressure, has created a breed of human with natural predatory counter-adaptations. Others claim ancient bioengineering is to blame, perhaps the result of forgotten pre-imperial science, or even tampering by xenos species such as the Old Ones or Necrontia. No theory has achieved full consensus. The Ordo Xenos has shown periodic interest in the planet, particularly following reports of unexplained biological phenomena, such as jungle entities that respond to psychic presence or flora that mimics human speech patterns before devouring the listener. Rituals within Catachan culture are pragmatic and personal. Victory feasts are rare and subdued. More common are post-battle rituals of sharpening weapons, cleaning blood from gear, or exchanging grim stories of the dead. Tattoos are used to mark milestones, surviving a particular jungle beast, surviving off-world deployment, or avenging a squadmate's death. These are not ceremonial but functional. Each mark serves as an informal record. Similarly, names like Straken or Marbo are spoken with reverence not because of their myth, but because of what they represent: survival without compromise. The cultural divide between Catachan and the wider Imperium is vast. While many guard regiments rely on commissars to maintain discipline, the Catachans enforce their own code. This code is silent, brutal, and unspoken. No soldier speaks during stealth movements unless necessary. No unnecessary gear is carried. No one eats until the perimeter is secured. These unwritten rules are more strictly followed than any munitorum directive. To break them is to endanger the squad, and that, more than cowardice or insubordination, is the ultimate crime. Catachan's influence on Imperial military doctrine remains niche but significant. While they are rarely deployed en masse due to logistical complications and their disdain for traditional command, they are a favoured option for jungle, xenos-infested, or chaos-tainted worlds where standard forces are ill-equipped to survive. Entire campaigns have been turned around by deploying a single Catachan regiment where dozens of others failed. Their tactics are studied by some, feared by others, and understood by few. Their continued survival and effectiveness are not due to advanced weapons, holy relics, or psychic powers. It comes from the refusal to die, the ability to adapt, and the will to treat war not as a choice but as an ecosystem to dominate. In the galaxy's most hostile war zones, where even the orcs hesitate and tyrannids pause, the jungle never sleeps, and neither do its sons. The most iconic weapon in the Catachan arsenal is not mass-produced or ritually blessed, it is the Jungle Blade. Known simply as the Catachan knife, this weapon is less a tool and more an extension of the user's hand. Each one is forged individually, often customized by the owner through carving, weight balance, or blood oil treatment. Its primary use is not ceremonial or symbolic, but practical, cutting through foliage, silencing sentries, or dispatching beasts. While standard Astra Militarum chainswords and bayonets are issued across the galaxy, few soldiers are known to take such personal care of a standard weapon as a Catachan does with their blade. The knife is sharpened daily, oiled with native poisons, and regarded as the last line of defense when all other options fail. Heavy weapons, when used by Catachan forces, are typically stripped down to the barest configurations. Missile launchers are often disassembled and repurposed into static traps or ambush bombs. Flamers, one of the few heavy weapons retained in original form, are favoured for their psychological and tactical value against both Xenos and the Warp-spawned. Within the narrow overgrowth of jungle worlds, flame weapons allow for immediate terrain denial and predator deterrence. Bolters, by contrast, are seen as unreliable, too noisy, too prone to over-penetration. In many cases, Catachans will default to las carbines or compact autoguns, which are easier to silence and maintain in damp, corrosive environments. Catachan vehicles exist, though not in high number. Chimera transports, sentinels, and hellhounds are the most commonly deployed. These are heavily modified in the field, armour plating removed or cut to allow better ventilation, weapons reconfigured to favour wide-angle fire, engines adapted to run on biofuel scavenged from local flora. In some cases, entire vehicle hulls are camouflaged with living vines and tree bark to mask thermal signatures. The Devil's Claw, a legendary Catachan chimera, was reportedly coated in chitin from a slain Catachan devil and driven straight through an Orc supply depot during the Metron 6 campaign. Its existence remains unconfirmed, but survivors report hearing the vehicle before they ever saw it, its exhaust howling like a feral predator. Elite units within the Catachan regiments are not assigned through rank or bureaucratic approval. They emerge naturally, warriors who have survived an exceptional number of campaigns or completed impossible missions without backup. The most infamous among these is Sly Marbo. Officially listed as a demolitions and reconnaissance expert, Marbo operates independently of traditional command structures. Some accounts suggest he infiltrated an entire Chaos warband and eliminated its leadership before any guardsman was aware of the incursion. Others imply he has no fixed location, instead materializing wherever a campaign is going badly. His dossier is sparse by design, scrubbed clean by the Departmentum Munitorum to preserve the secrecy of his methods. Whether man, myth, or both, Marbo represents the apex of Catachan warfare, a ghost among enemies, silent and final. Another unit of note is the so-called Ghost Killers, an informal name given to veterans deployed on demon-infested worlds. These squads, while not officially recognised, are tasked with rooting out warp-tainted jungle growth, cult activity, and minor demon incursions. Equipped with flame-retardant gear and purgation grenades, they move in absolute silence, torching everything tainted by the Imperium. These operations are rarely spoken of, even within Catachan ranks. Survivors of such missions often withdraw from their units, becoming reclusive and silent. Some are believed to have developed minor psychic resistance due to repeated exposure to warp phenomena, though the Inquisition refuses to confirm this. War machines are rarely attached to Catachan forces. When deployed, it is only after extensive modification. The rare basilisk or manticore seen with Catachan markings is stripped of tracking systems, repainted with thermal disruptive colours, and surrounded by tripwires to prevent approach from enemy scouts or beasts. More often, Catachan commanders prefer to rely on terrain to serve as artillery. Entire ridges are pre-wired with explosives and collapsed on enemy formations with surgical precision. They see little value in large, lumbering war machines. To a Catachan fighter, the best weapon is the one that strikes unseen and disappears before it is targeted. Behavioural tendencies on the battlefield mirror the instincts developed during life on their homeworld. Catachans prefer fluid movement over static lines. They avoid fixed fortifications and reject trench warfare unless absolutely necessary. They deploy in small groups, often no larger than a dozen, and rely on mutual trust, silent signals, and deep familiarity with terrain. Vocal communication is kept to a minimum. Fire discipline is absolute. Ambushes are prepared over days, often triggered only after observing enemy patterns long enough to guarantee maximum impact. They move like predators, not soldiers, and this mindset leads them to treat enemy forces as prey rather than rivals. Internal divisions within Catachan regiments are subtle but significant. While there are no official castes, informal identities develop around experience level, survival record, and off-world deployment frequency. Veterans who have fought on multiple death worlds or returned from missions that decimated entire squads are often referred to in hushed tones. These individuals do not command through volume or ceremony, but through silent gravitas. Their presence alters group behaviour. New recruits, while rare, are quietly tested by veterans through indirect challenges, navigating treacherous terrain alone, surviving jungle patrols without backup, or handling live traps without triggering them. While they're not a spiritual people in the traditional Imperial sense, Catachans maintain a deep respect for the dead. Fallen squadmates are never abandoned, even in the most dangerous circumstances. Retrieval of bodies is considered sacred, and burial is performed in silence with blades drawn and heads bowed. Some veterans carry bone fragments of lost comrades, wrapped in cloth or lashed to gear, not as charms but as reminders. Names of the dead are rarely spoken aloud but passed on through looks, gestures, and shared memory. In this way, the identity of a regiment stretches across time, with each generation carrying the scars of the last. Their relationship with other Imperial forces is often strained. Catachans view formal parade regiments like the Mordians or Praetorians with disdain, seeing their rigid codes and bright uniforms as suicidal theatre. In contrast, they hold a cautious respect for similarly hardened units such as the Death Corps of Krieg or the Elysian Drop Troopers. The cultural clashes remain inevitable. Joint operations are rare and usually kept brief. In one notable case during the Dargan Swamp reclamation, a Catachan unit reportedly abandoned an entrenched Valhallan regiment to its fate after repeated operational disagreements. The Munitorum recorded it as a logistical miscommunication. Field officers later remarked that trust, once lost among Catachans, cannot be regained. Despite their nonconformity, the Departamento Munitorum tolerates, and even protects, the Catachan way. Their utility is undeniable. When facing jungle-covered demon worlds, tyrannid seed infestations, or Xenos insurgencies hiding in vegetation, there are no better candidates. Their kill count per deployment is disproportionately high. Their survival rate, while lower than more mechanized regiments, is made acceptable by the sheer quality of recruits. Each Catachan trooper is worth several standard guardsmen in the right terrain. This fact is quietly acknowledged in Munitorum projections, and as such, the Catachans are left largely to their own methods. While they fight under the flag of the Imperium, their allegiance remains primarily to each other. Their loyalty is not abstract. It is not given to the High Lords of Terror or even to the God Emperor in ceremonial terms. It is proven in the jungle, in the mud, in the kill. It is etched into their scars and worn on their skin. To be a Catachan is to be forged in death, to walk in silence through lands that want to eat you alive, and to kill not because of ideology, but because you have never learned how not to. In this, they are not Imperial soldiers by choice. They are survivors weaponized by necessity. The jungle gave them no option. The Imperium merely gave them orders, and when the orders stop coming, they will still survive, because that is what they do. The first official Imperial record of Catachan as a death world appears in the archives of the Adeptus Administratum during Millennia 36, year 88. This was not the result of colonization, conquest or rediscovery, but a casualty report. An exploratory vessel from the Chartist dynasty Leontaris reported the loss of its entire planetary survey team within hours of surface landing. The only surviving member, recovered days later by an orbital servitor craft, had amputated his own arm after a neurospore infection rendered it uncontrollable. His fragmented testimony referred to trees that bled acid, insects that mimicked human voices, and a jungle that moved with purpose. The report was marked as credible but classified as non-actionable due to extreme planetary hazard. Catachan was labelled non-compliant Death World Classification Alpha Prime. By Millennia 37, the Imperium had re-established intermittent contact with surviving human populations on the planet. These settlements were not discovered through scans, but encountered by chance when a rogue trader expedition stumbled upon a hidden village while extracting rare toxins from the southern hemisphere. The local humans, hardened, silent, and heavily scarred, refused contact. 3 of the trader's armed escort were found dead the next morning, their gear stripped and their bodies camouflaged using native plants. No hostile declaration was made, but the message was clear. This early encounter was preserved in the trader's navigational journal, now stored within the sealed vaults of the Segmentum Ultima Administratum archives. Formal integration into the Astra Militarum did not occur until Millennia 38, year 221, when the Catachan system became strategically relevant during a warp storm that rendered nearby supply routes unusable. In desperate need of localized manpower, the Departmentum Munitorum authorized limited recruitment efforts. These were spearheaded not through traditional conscription, but through embedded observers posing as Medici teams. These observers were dispatched to assess the viability of the local population for Guard integration. Of the initial 40 personnel sent planetside, only 5 returned, all injured, all silent. Their only written report noted, capable of combat, already engaged in lifelong warfare hostile to strangers, extreme survivability confirmed. Shortly thereafter, the first official Catachan regiment was designated, the Catachan 17th Jungle Warfare Battalion. It was deployed in Millennia 38, year 223 during the campaign of Cypra Omega, where Tyranid vanguard spores had begun to overwhelm local PDF forces. The Adeptus biologist notes from this campaign include astonished commentary on the Catachan's immunity to neurotoxin strains that rendered other Guard units immobile within hours. The 17th Battalion not only survived prolonged engagement within the infested swamps of Cypra Omega, but was credited with eliminating 3 synapse node clusters using improvised explosives, lured predator packs, and terrain-triggered kill zones. Their performance resulted in the revision of Tyranid counter-engagement protocols and the inclusion of Catachan standard swamp warfare in the Munitorum's Jungle Doctrine archive. The Catachan 9th Regiment, formed shortly after, was deployed to the Urzikar warfront in Millennia 38, year 289, where orc infestation had destabilized a refinery system critical to Segmentum Ultima fuel logistics. Administratum scribe militant Talanjeski documented the 9th Regiment's refusal to engage the orcs in direct firefights. Instead, they vanished into the outer marshes and began a systematic campaign of attrition. Fuel silos exploded in sequence over 2 weeks. Orc supply trails were filled with caustic wildlife. By the time the 9th Regiment re-emerged to rendezvous with the wider Guard force, over 70% of the Orc forces had been annihilated without a single open field engagement. The commanding general, a Mordian named Gravis Heldren, reportedly refused to acknowledge their contribution in formal commendations, labelling their methods unorthodox, unsanctioned, and bordering on heretical. By Millennia 39, the Munitorum shifted its approach. Rather than attempting to normalize Catachan behavior, it began assigning them only to campaigns where standard tactics had failed. This decision was backed by repeated internal reviews, which concluded that the logistical support required to manage a Catachan regiment was lower than any other Death World force, provided they were given operational freedom and not embedded with high command personnel. The Administratum initiated a new classification, Catachan Deployment Protocols, Revision Theta 9, which formalized their autonomy in exchange for measurable results. This protocol remained active for centuries and was invoked in at least 47 documented campaigns. One such instance was the Gorastar Siege, a prolonged conflict in Millennia 39, year 671, where a hybrid gene-stealer cult had rooted itself deep within the sewer systems of a hive world. The initial deployment of Elysian drop troopers failed due to the collapse of tunnel networks under seismic disruption. The Catachan 25th Regiment was then deployed. Within 6 months, every tunnel under Hive Gorastar had been mapped, trapped, and systematically purged. Adeptus Mechanicus records note that the 25th Regiment refused all resupply drops, instead using gene-stealer tissue as bait for subterranean predators native to the Hive's industrial waste layer. These predators, heretofore undocumented, were later classified as biosymbiotic carrion fauna, creatures believed to have evolved within the toxic sludge of the Hive's core. Administratum casualty reports from this campaign show an 81% loss rate among initial forces. In contrast, the Catachans recorded a 33% loss rate, unusually low for Death World deployments. The Magos Biologies assigned to the campaign filed a sealed report titled Adaptive Warfare Beyond Doctrine, the Catachan Paradox, citing the regiment's ability to leverage unstable environments in ways bordering on preternatural. Not all campaigns ended in success. The Kakarus Proving Grounds operation in Millennia 40, year 48 was a logistical failure. A Catachan regiment, the 28th, was paired with mechanized support from Armageddon Steel Legion units to reinforce a planetary governor's palace under siege by renegade PDF forces. Catachan Command rejected the proposed defense strategy, instead proposing a counter-ambush deep in the governorate's surrounding forest zones. The Steel Legion refused, citing structural integrity of their armour in open combat. The result was a disjointed engagement in which both forces operated independently. The Catachans neutralised the enemy command structure through surgical assassination strikes, but failed to communicate this to the Steel Legion. The Armageddon forces advanced under the assumption of continued resistance, and were devastated by friendly trap systems. Administratum mediation concluded the fault was shared, though internal Munitorum correspondence reveals frustration at the Catachan's total disregard for external coordination. Still, the victories outweighed the losses. Over time, Catachan regiments gained a semi-mythical status within guard circles, not for their numbers or gear, but for their uncanny ability to complete missions that defied probability. This reputation was formally recognised in Millennia 40, year 442, when the Department Munitorum exempted all Catachan commanders above the rank of colonel from ceremonial parade formations. This was justified on the grounds of environmental conditioning incompatibility, though most viewed it as quiet admission that the jungle warriors could not be made to conform without loss of operational effectiveness. By the time of the 13th Black Crusade in Millennia 41, Catachan regiments were not only respected but feared by enemies and allies alike. Administratum war planners designated entire sectors as Catachan zones in campaign briefings, meaning areas where conventional tactics were to be suspended and operational control handed to jungle-trained command. These zones included infested moons, corrupted forests, and city ruins partially reclaimed by overgrowth. Within these zones, Catachan squads moved unseen, deploying counterinsurgency operations and booby-trap networks with clinical precision. Their combat data was later integrated into Munitorum jungle warfare training across multiple Schola Progenium facilities. Their contribution during the Pyrrhon Scourge in Millennia 41, year 837, marked another significant chapter. Deployed to a series of agricultural worlds overrun by mutated plant life suspected of chaos taint, the Catachan 12th Regiment conducted mass purges of the infested fields. They established a perimeter kill zone and created controlled burns that eradicated hundreds of miles of corrupted growth. Local civilians were evacuated, inoculated with spore-resistant injections derived from Catachan biochemistry, and resettled under Arbites supervision. Magos Xenobotanica records praise the regiment's biological familiarity with toxic flora, as instrumental in containing the infestation, a segment of their field notes remains classified, suggesting discoveries deemed too destabilizing for public record. Although the Catachans were not the largest regiment by population within the Astra Militarum, their impact in tactical deployments grew exponentially during the midpoint of the 38th millennium. The Adeptus Administratum, tracking deployments and victory ratios during this period, began to note a pattern. Operations involving the Catachans, particularly on worlds with dense terrain, demonstrated casualty ratios significantly lower than those of more standardized regiments. This discrepancy, initially attributed to luck or incomplete data, was later attributed to two critical operational variables: the Catachans' unparalleled environmental adaptation and their decentralized command structure that permitted field-level initiative without bureaucratic delay. The Third War of Harakon, recorded in the Administratum Segmentum Tempestus War docket, offered a clear case study of these traits. While Harakon's rebel enclaves had bogged down multiple Imperial Guard battalions in prolonged attritional warfare, the arrival of the 34th Catachan Regiment turned the campaign. Unlike previous regiments that deployed with prefabricated defences and rigid frontline positions, the Catachans dispersed into the swamp networks, initiated fire teams with only basic orders, and systematically eliminated rebel command chains within 72 standard hours. The Administratum noted that senior command on Harakon received no request for artillery support during this time frame, and that the Catachans' kill-to-death ratio surpassed 9-1 before reinforcements even mobilized. This pattern of sudden resolution would be repeated across dozens of operations, leading to a revised categorization of the regiment type. Administratum dispatches from year 300 of Millennia 39 recommended that jungle fighters be reclassified from auxiliary light infantry to autonomous tactical response force when deployed in compatible environments. This was not purely a symbolic gesture, it carried logistical consequences, reducing oversight on requisitions and granting selected Catachan commanders the authority to override supply chain protocols if time-sensitive survival equipment or terrain-specific munitions were required. Of particular interest to Administratum archivists was the intersection of Catachan culture with religious orthodoxy. Chaplain militant Hieronymus Vec, deployed as an observer during the Orphean campaign, filed a curious report. Despite general compliance with emperor worship, Catachan troops displayed minimal regard for religious ceremony and appeared to treat faith as a quiet internal matter. While not technically heretical, their indifference to liturgical discipline caused tension with attached ecclesiarchy units. Vec reported instances where Catachan squads refused to pause for prayer before deployment, stating that jungle waits for no sermon, a phrase later quoted in several Administratum case studies as an example of cultural divergence within the Guard. Another significant event occurred during the Krellin V reclamation. In this campaign, the 17th Catachan Regiment was assigned to operate in coordination with the mechanized Elysian drop troops. The Administratum's logistical officers expressed concern prior to deployment regarding interoperability between regiments that differed so drastically in doctrine. These concerns were well-founded. Midway through the second week of the operation, Catachan forces independently rerouted a munitions convoy assigned to the Elysians, citing terrain-based navigational errors. In reality, as later confirmed by internal review, the Catachans had scouted a flank route around an enemy fortress and required immediate demolition charges, thus appropriating the munitions without formal request. The operation succeeded, and the fortress fell within hours, but the incident triggered an administrative inquiry. The report concluded that Catachan non-compliance with chain of command structure is balanced by superior operational outcomes in hostile terrain scenarios. No formal punishment was issued, and the regiment was rotated into another war zone within one standard month. Within the Administratum's broader framework, such results began to affect long-term imperial policy. By year 600 of the 39th millennium, new regiments formed on death worlds were increasingly modelled after the Catachan archetype. High Command began funding training programs that incorporated basic survivalism, camouflage doctrine, and terrain responsiveness, even in regiments stationed on hive worlds. This shift in military education, although incremental, was partially credited to ongoing review of Catachan reports submitted to segmentum administratum offices. The Jungle Fighters had in effect altered not just how war was fought in certain theatres, but how its success was recorded and how future soldiers were prepared for it. The final development of interest within this period involved the emergence of individuals whose reputations exceeded normal bureaucratic classification. Sly Marbo, whose operational records were nearly erased due to their implausibility, became a subject of internal review in administratum subsector archives. Despite multiple requests from various departments to validate the existence of this individual beyond anecdotal field reports, no definitive service file was located. One surviving memo, authored by a Segmentum Tempestus analyst, remarked simply, "Marbo does not follow deployment orders. Orders follow Marbo." This memo was archived, redacted, and ultimately sealed, but its existence underscores the difficulties the Adeptus Administratum faced when categorizing figures from such a regiment. The documentation from these decades illustrates a broader institutional tension. The Catachans, while loyal in broad terms, operated outside the expected norms of imperial warfare. Their successes were undeniable, but their methods strained formal systems designed for clarity, hierarchy, and predictability. As the administratum continued to file reports and tally body counts, one truth emerged repeatedly. In the jungle, precision command often failed, but instinct survived. And that, above all, defined the enduring presence of the Catachan Jungle Fighters in the Imperial record. As the Catachan Jungle Fighters continued to serve across the Segmentum Pacificus and beyond, Imperial commanders began to encounter a persistent pattern. Deployment of Catachan regiments often came with short-term communication breakdowns, but long-term mission success. This inconsistency did not go unnoticed by the Departmentum Munitorum, which bore the burden of coordinating supplies, relaying orders, and tracking battlefield compliance. The Catachans, by both necessity and tradition, often operated outside of rigid supply lines, preferring to scavenge, improvise, or fabricate their own tools and weapon modifications in the field. In some cases, full platoons functioned for weeks without Munitorum resupply, using reclaimed munitions, native plant toxins, or salvaged enemy gear to continue fighting. The Munitorum's standard evaluation forms, optimized for regiments like the Mordians or Vostroyans, often failed to produce usable metrics when applied to the Catachans. Reports from dozens of worlds across a century of war included entries like untrackable movement patterns, substitution of standardized ordnance with locally improvised compounds, and insufficient paper trail for commendation records. One evaluation officer based out of Fort Vexis remarked that Catachan compliance is inversely proportional to their effectiveness. The less they listen, the more they win. This quote, repeated sarcastically among departmental scribes for decades, was later appended to a non-standard training document for regimental compliance officers assigned to Catachan units. A significant episode highlighting this logistical disconnect occurred during the cleansing of the fungal overgrowths on Harkel's Moor, a death world in the Ultima Segmentum. The Munitorum had pre-assigned 6 Catachan platoons to reinforce a siege unit stationed on elevated terrain. However, on arrival, the platoon commanders collectively refused the assigned position, citing incorrect topographical readings. Instead, they disappeared into the lower jungle basin and independently launched a series of ambushes against the Tyrannid bioforms. Over a span of 15 days, they collapsed the Xeno advance before it reached the ridgeline. The siege unit, still awaiting artillery coordinates, later found the basin littered with Tyrannid husks and repurposed traps fashioned from fungal roots and shrapnel. The commanding siege officer filed a commendation for the Catachans, but also formally requested they never be assigned under his operational purview again. Meanwhile, the Office of Imperial Tithes began conducting closer evaluations of Catachan's regimental contribution rates. Despite its harsh environment and small population, the planet consistently met or exceeded its recruitment quotas. though records indicated that many volunteers were not registered by Administratum Census protocols until after they had already deployed. These irregularities led to suspicion that non-sanctioned tribal groups or unlisted Catachan settlements were contributing fighters through informal means. The office ultimately chose not to intervene, reasoning that such practices, while bureaucratically incorrect, increased troop availability without resource investment. Thus, the practice was quietly tolerated. There were also growing tensions between Catachan regiments and units from more structured worlds. This friction often played out in joint operations. During the cleansing of Khazrak Theta, a mixed-force campaign involving both Catachans and the Palladian 89th Infantry, conflicting doctrines nearly derailed the campaign. The Palladians favoured rigid formations and fire discipline, while the Catachans preferred decentralized cell tactics. After 3 failed attempts at cooperative manoeuvring, the Catachans disregarded the agreed-upon assault vector and infiltrated the enemy bunker line using subterranean tunnels and toxin dispersal methods. The campaign succeeded, but the after-action report filed by the Palladian colonel noted irreconcilable doctrine disparity and recommended that Catachan units be deployed only with similarly unorthodox regiments or under complete autonomy. This recommendation would be taken seriously in future war zones. The Departmentum Munitorum began to assign Catachans to unaccompanied theatres or pair them with other non-standard forces such as Elysian drop troops or Tanith scouts, units that similarly valued initiative and terrain advantage over direct confrontation. These specialised theatres became known colloquially as ghost sectors, referring to deployments where Imperial oversight was minimal, record-keeping inconsistent, and battlefield survival relied entirely on the soldiers' capacity to adapt. In such sectors, Catachans not only survived, they dominated. It was in these contexts that some of the regiment's most enigmatic figures rose to prominence. Aside from Sly Marbo, other names began to circulate in unofficial reports. Sergeant Harker, a heavy weapons specialist capable of solo suppression tactics, while carrying a heavy bolter unsupported, was one such example. Imperial field analysts reviewing footage retrieved from Recon Auspex drones concluded that Harker's efficiency exceeded the average of entire Cadian squads in open engagements. Yet, once again, his personnel file was incomplete, missing full psychometric evaluations, prior disciplinary reports, and even the exact date of birth. This trend was echoed in other files, suggesting a systemic failure, or perhaps intentional omission, of detailed record-keeping for high-performance Catachan soldiers. In response, a small task force within the Administratum was formed to evaluate Catachan personnel records. Their findings, compiled in the sealed Voxari report, concluded that excessive standardization of the Catachan command structure would likely reduce their operational performance by an estimated 63.4%. The report recommended no further integration with standard Astra Militarum hierarchy, and instead proposed the designation of Catachan commanders as autonomous priority agents when operating on Death Worlds. Although this recommendation never achieved full doctrinal adoption, it influenced Munitorum policy at the divisional level. Commanders were instructed to allow Catachan officers greater freedom in field operations and to avoid direct interference unless failure of command could be conclusively demonstrated. In effect, this policy gave Catachan regiments a semi-independent status within the broader structure of the Imperial Guard, preserving their methods while insulating higher command from direct accountability for their actions. Through these administrative decisions, the legacy of the Catachan Jungle Fighters grew, less as a regiment and more as a phenomenon. They were irregulars who could not be regularized, survivors who rejected standard survival kits, soldiers whose effectiveness came not from the Imperium's systems but despite them. In the dark corners of a galaxy at war, they operated with clarity, violence, and purpose, unburdened by protocol, unmatched in hostility, and ultimately irreplaceable by any other force in the Emperor's arsenal. The Order Xenos, the branch of the Inquisition tasked with investigating alien threats to the Imperium, has long maintained a watchful eye on the jungle world of Catachan and the regiments that hail from it. Though not heretical in nature, the planet itself bears several anomalous characteristics, including a biosphere of extreme hostility that surpasses even some Death Worlds catalogued during the Great Crusade. The Order Xenos, the branch of the Inquisition tasked with investigating alien threats to the Imperium, has long maintained a watchful eye on the jungle world of Catachan and the regiments that hail from it. Though not heretical in nature, the planet itself bears several anomalous characteristics, including a biosphere of extreme hostility that surpasses even some Death Worlds catalogued during the Great Crusade. Internal reports classified under Ordo Xenos sub-level clearance designate Catachan as an evolved anomaly. Its native flora and fauna, biologically optimized for predation, are the subject of ongoing debate. While the Adeptus Mechanicus maintains that these organisms evolved naturally, some members of the Inquisition believe the planet's lifeforms are the result of bioengineering conducted in the Dark Age of technology, or even by Xenos species now extinct. In several restricted dossiers dated to the 39th millennium, inquisitorial operatives embedded in jungle campaigns note the uncanny instinctive responses of Catachan warriors when encountering alien threats. Notably, during the invasion of Galtha Prime by Tyranid Splinter Fleet Erebos, a Catachan regiment was inserted deep into contested jungle zones prior to the arrival of primary Astra Militarum forces. These troops adapted rapidly to Tyranid behaviour, developing trap systems and camouflage that mimicked predatory Tyranid lures. A detailed field report by Inquisitor Talzin of the Ordo Xenos expressed concern that these adaptations were too efficient, bordering on intuitive. His request for genetic screening of Catachan soldiers was denied by Segmentum Command due to morale and resource considerations. Further scrutiny by the Inquisition intensified following the events on Kaelin's Hope in the year 300 of the 41st millennium. A Catachan detachment under Colonel Harvan was deployed to exterminate a gene-stealer infestation. While the mission was declared a success, subsequent autopsy logs and recovered Vox recordings suggested disturbing deviations from standard engagement protocols. Several unarmed cult members were executed before interrogation, and local PDF soldiers reported witnessing Catachan troops conversing with infested civilians before incinerating entire habitation blocks. These incidents were dismissed as stress-induced hallucinations, but internal memos between Ordo Xenos operatives suggest concern over potential memetic contamination or instinctual recognition of the alien presence, described as a hunter sensing another. By this stage, the Inquisition's Ordo Hereticus also began monitoring Catachan units more closely. Their interest, however, was less biological and more behavioural. Some Catachan officers, particularly veterans from multi-campaign deployments, exhibited resistance to commissariat oversight and developed their own internal codes of conduct that often conflicted with standard Munitorum directives. Although no formal heresy was found, one controversial report from Inquisitor Militant Darnach describes a Catachan platoon that executed its own commissar following a breach of jungle concealment protocol. The report claims that the soldiers, led by a Sergeant Trelvac, cited the law of the undergrowth, an undocumented battlefield code which prioritized camouflage and survival over chain of command rigidity. While Segmentum authorities declined to pursue charges, the Inquisition quietly initiated psychological monitoring of Catachan command structures. By the late 41st millennium, several suppressed communiques reference the Codex Catachan, a rumoured oral doctrine passed from veteran to recruit outside formal guard training. Though likely apocryphal, these teachings were said to contain detailed strategies for not only jungle warfare, but also autonomous unit operation in isolation from the Imperium at large. The Inquisition's concern was not with the military content, but with the ideological potential. Units capable of independent judgment, trained from birth in survival, and bonded by cultural codes alien to most of the Imperium's rigid hierarchies. Some of the most heavily classified findings come from an Ordo Malleus detachment attached to the purging of Coronus Secundus, a shrine world corrupted by minor warp entities during the 400th year of the current millennium. A Catachan regiment was involved in the cleansing, though it was not initially briefed on the demonic nature of the threat. Post-operation interviews reveal that several soldiers reportedly saw warp entities without manifesting psychological degradation. One soldier, referred to in reports only as Sergeant 5, described the demons as just another predator and claimed he felt nothing. Inquisitor Braille, who authored the report, emphasized the mental resilience of the Catachan soldiers, but also questioned whether this represented a lack of soul perception or an evolutionary trait. The files were sealed under inquisitorial level red. Even within the broader ecclesiarchy, Catachan regiments are viewed with a mixture of respect and unease. Their rejection of traditional religious displays, such as battle prayers, ceremonial rites, or imperial hymnals, is well documented. Chaplains assigned to Catachan formations often report difficulty in integrating into regimental culture. On multiple occasions, Ministorum missionaries embedded for morale support have been quietly withdrawn after failing to influence the troops. While not blasphemous, the Catachan's pragmatic atheism is viewed as a potential vector for sub-imperial ideologies. Inquisitorial records acknowledge no signs of chaos worship or radical doctrine, but repeat a pattern of spiritual isolation and utilitarian morality among Catachan warriors. An obscure file from Inquisitor Gevril of the Ordo Sicarius raises further concern. During an assassination operation on Malfi Prime involving the Officio Assassinorum, a Vindicare agent was exfiltrated through a Catachan forward firebase. The soldiers cooperated without hesitation, and the mission was successful. However, in Gevril's report she notes that the Catachans recognized the agent's function before being briefed. One squad member allegedly commented, "He's one of the Long Shadows, right? We've seen those before." Gevril requested follow-up interviews, but the Catachan unit had already been redeployed to another war zone, and no further contact was made. Despite the multitude of reports, suspicions, and strange encounters, no formal charges have ever been brought against any Catachan regiment by the Inquisition. Their loyalty to the Imperium is evident in their staggering body counts and battlefield efficacy, and yet the silence surrounding them is louder than any trial or tribunal. In the halls of the Ordo Xenos and the Ordo Hereticus, one can find unofficial mantras scribbled in the margins of sealed reports. Trust the Catachans to kill the enemy. Do not ask how they did it. This cultural opacity, combined with an increasing record of borderline anomalous behaviour, has made some within the Inquisition quietly propose that the jungle world of Catachan represents a survivalist divergence within humanity itself, not in mutation or gene heresy, but in psyche and spirit. A branch of the species that has adapted so completely to killing that its values, instincts, and emotional responses no longer align with those of the wider Imperium. Whatever the truth, one thing remains certain. When the Inquisition needs a world cleansed and has no time for questions, it sends the Catachans. Not because they are subtle, or pure, or even predictable, but because they are necessary. In the years following the fall of Medusa V, the Inquisition began to raise further concerns regarding the unusually high casualty ratios among Imperial officers embedded within Catachan regiments. While such losses were often attributed to the extreme operational environments, multiple accounts filed by surviving commissars painted a more concerning picture. Some suggested that jungle fighters occasionally treated oversight from the Schola Progenium as a threat rather than guidance, leading to mysterious disappearances and fatal accidents during recon or cleansing runs. These allegations were rarely substantiated, as the hostile terrain and biological hazards offered an easy excuse. However, the Inquisition quietly compiled records from regimental detachments across Catachan deployments to identify patterns. An analysis of these records uncovered a recurring anomaly. In nearly every campaign where a Catachan regiment operated alongside stricter Imperial structures, there were uncommonly high rates of friendly fire incidents, most of which were never fully resolved. Inquisitorial agents embedded under cover within support detachments began to suspect that the fierce autonomy of Catachans bordered on a functional rejection of centralized authority. However, such accusations carried political weight, as the Departamento Munitorum relied heavily on the Catachan's specialized skill set. The Ordo Hereticus compiled an internal dossier cataloguing over 200 such incidents. While no singular case could implicate a systemic breach of faith, the pattern raised concerns about long-term compliance should the Imperium ever shift towards stricter martial control. The most notable escalation occurred during the Ballur 9 suppression, where elements of the Catachan 98th were deployed alongside a Mechanicus exploratory force. The campaign focused on reclaiming an overgrown research outpost, long since consumed by jungle regrowth and Xenos infestation. Midway through the operation, the Adeptus Mechanicus demanded reroutes in fire zoning to preserve archaeological value. The Catachans refused. A senior tech priest attempted to assert override authority, citing Mars-issued authority protocols. Within hours, Vox contact with the Mechanicus group was lost. Later scans showed that the Mechanicus team had been ambushed by native predators. Catachan logs indicated no contact during the event. The incident was recorded as an operational miscommunication. The Inquisition noted the timing. Further observations from the Ordo Xenos indicated that the Catachan's instinctive resistance to outside command may in fact serve a strategic function. Their distrust of Mechanicus technology, in particular, had prevented potential contamination from corrupted Auspex gear during the Syraxis jungle cleansing. In this case, the Catachan's refusal to accept Mechanicus-supplied biometrics saved nearly 2 entire platoons from ambushes laid by Xenos forms capable of mimicking Imperial life signs. This began a subtle re-evaluation of their apparent defiance, not as insubordination, but as a deeply internalized defense mechanism honed by generations of brutal survival. From the inquisitorial viewpoint, it represented a paradox. The Catachan's nonconformity made them more reliable in hostile zones, but also harder to govern under central rule. There were also whispers of spiritual deviations within the Catachan ranks. While formally worshipping the Emperor and attending sanctioned liturgies, there existed unverified reports of Catachan regiments performing private jungle rites before campaigns. These involved ancestral invocations, weapon bonding rituals, and the burial of tokens prior to deployment. Some agents considered this cultural rather than heretical, but others questioned the blurred line between reverence for nature and latent animism. No direct correlation with chaos influence was found. Nonetheless, the Ordo Malleus maintained ongoing surveillance to detect any drift from the ecclesiarchal orthodoxy. During the Jonath Delta campaign, an inquisitorial attaché embedded within the 121st Catachan attempted to initiate a cleansing of local wildlife, suspecting minor demonic interference. The Catachans refused to fire on the fauna, claiming such actions would disrupt jungle equilibrium and compromise concealment. A heated exchange followed. Within a week, the attaché was killed by an environmental hazard. Official records cited a toxic spore eruption. However, some whispered that the spores were never catalogued by Mechanicus bioalchemists, nor ever encountered again. When questioned, the Catachans simply said that the jungle provides, and the jungle takes. This incident marked the last time an Inquisitor attempted to override operational judgment within a Catachan-led force directly. Throughout these confrontations, the Inquisition slowly came to understand that the Catachans operated under a radically different mode of logic. It was not rebelliousness in the traditional sense, but a biologically encoded form of command resistance developed through necessity. The jungle was their master. Anyone who claimed higher rank without understanding the laws of survival was considered a liability. Their loyalty to the Imperium remained functional, but conditional. It was rooted not in hierarchy but in purpose. So long as the mission aligned with the preservation of human life and extermination of Xenos threats, the Catachans served without hesitation. But when commands endangered efficiency or violated the instinctive rhythm of the jungle, they were ignored. Inquisitorial archives eventually classified the Catachan forces under a special doctrine, Pragmatic compliance. This designation allowed higher autonomy in field operations and discouraged unnecessary bureaucratic oversight. The designation was kept quiet. No public declaration was made. But among the Ordo agents who had worked alongside Catachan units and survived, a quiet consensus emerged. These jungle warriors were not to be controlled, only trusted, or avoided. Despite the persistent tension between the Catachan regiments and the broader Imperium's command hierarchy, their record of operational success remained indisputable. Their unique skill set filled a doctrinal gap that no other Imperial Guard formation could replicate. In regions where armoured companies could not tread, where psychers faltered, and even the Adeptus Astartes were hindered by environmental constraints, the Catachans remained mobile, efficient, and devastatingly effective. Commanders across Segmentum Pacificus and Ultima began requesting Catachan auxiliaries for any campaign involving dense flora, volatile biospheres, or prolonged guerrilla engagements. One of the most widely circulated internal briefings following the Second Castrel Novum offensive detailed how the Catachan 114th Regiment not only repelled a full-scale Orc push through the swamps of Kulbrax Delta, but established a sustainable jungle kill zone that persisted autonomously for 6 months without need for resupply. Using only native materials and salvaged equipment, the regiment fashioned camouflage traps, repurposed enemy war gear, and initiated a rolling ambush pattern that decimated over 6,000 Orcs. The Orc warlord's head was presented to Imperial Command wrapped in local thorn vines, with a note simply reading, "Handled." The cost, 37 Catachan casualties. As their notoriety grew, so did the myths. In some sectors, stories of Catachan warriors killing lictors with combat knives were whispered in hushed tones among junior officers. Others spoke of regiments walking untouched through Nurgle-blighted swamps or tracking chaos cultists across warp-tainted terrain without suffering corruption. While many of these stories were exaggerated, they reinforced the perception that the Catachans were not simply resilient, but possessed an almost unnatural affinity with survival. The more grounded analysts within the Ordo Xenos believed this mystique served a tactical function. Enemy forces often hesitated to pursue retreating Catachans into dense foliage, fearing the forest more than the enemy. This psychological warfare effect was neither trained nor engineered. It was the result of a collective reputation built over centuries of brutal war. Interestingly, the Catachans themselves rarely embraced this mythologizing. To them, survival was not a mark of superiority, it was the minimum standard. Death was not to be mourned, nor valor to be praised. It was expected. They viewed war not through the lens of honor, duty, or ideology, but through raw utility. When a squad was wiped out, the jungle would consume them. When one survived, he simply prepared for the next fight. This mindset often baffled ecclesiarchy preachers, who struggled to instill notions of martyrdom or divine purpose into regiments whose only religion was practical warfare. Attempts to assign saints or relics to the Catachan culture were politely rejected or ignored. In rare instances, retired jungle fighters were assigned to scholar training cadres, though they often struggled to adapt to the rigid institutional doctrines of Imperial Guard academies. Their students either emerged as brilliant field tacticians or burned out entirely, unable to reconcile the contradictory natures of Catachan instincts and Imperial bureaucracy. One such trainer, a veteran of the Vraxian tar pit campaign, was noted for summarizing his philosophy in a single phrase written across the barracks wall. "If it moves and it's not us, kill it. If it doesn't move, check twice." That instructor was eventually reassigned after multiple disciplinary reports, but his teachings persisted in the underground training circles of recon regiments. Even within the broader Guard community, Catachan regiments were seen as an outlier, not merely elite, but separate. They rarely fought alongside other regiments for long, not out of disdain, but due to incompatibility. Their methods, unpredictable, decentralized, and often brutal, clashed with the organized formations of Astroyan Firstborn or the mechanized columns of the Armageddon Steel Legion. Yet there were times when their presence tipped the balance of entire war zones. In the Ashla Peninsula insurgency, a single Catachan platoon embedded with PDF units halted a Tau recon expansion by laying weeks' worth of subterranean charges through mossy ridgelines. The operation destroyed not only the vanguard, but forced the entire Tau offensive to reroute, buying time for orbital reinforcements. The PDF commander later admitted he never even knew where the Catachans were positioned. They simply showed up, made the ridge explode, and disappeared again. Perhaps the most accurate summary of Catachan doctrine came not from a tactician or inquisitor, but from a Vox-recorded debrief by General Augustus Vale, who once oversaw joint operations during the Fulgric Delta Purge. When asked by a junior officer how to work with the Catachans, Vale reportedly paused, exhaled slowly and said, "You don't work with them. You unleash them, then pray you're not in the way." By Millennia 42, as the Imperium fractured under the pressure of warp storms, Xenos resurgence and internal decay, the Catachans remained unchanged. They continued to deploy, to adapt, to survive. Worlds burned, sectors fell, but deep within every jungle there remained at least one unit who would not be silenced. They held no grand vision of Imperium-wide salvation. Their war was intimate, close-ranged, and perpetual, and while no Catachan regiment had ever marched in triumphal procession through Terra's gates, their legacy remained etched in every world where survival depended not on firepower, but ferocity. For the Catachans, glory was irrelevant, victory was breathing one more day, and in the darkest reaches of the galaxy, where even the Emperor's light dimmed, that was enough.